Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The metallic taste of filtered air filled Lieutenant Cale Masson's lungs as he adjusted his tactical visor. The wasteland stretched before him, a desolate canvas of rust-colored dust and skeletal structures that once housed civilization. He ran his fingers through his short-cropped hair, feeling the smoothness of his scalp where others bore the raised tissue of battle scars. "Soldier without scars," they called him behind his back. At first it had been whispered with envy, then with suspicion. No one survived 7 years on the front lines without collecting marks of close calls, especially not a scout lieutenant who specialized in high-risk reconnaissance. "Perimeter scanning complete. Sector F-12 clear," Masson reported into his comm unit, the words automatic after years of service. His eyes, however, were fixed on an anomaly his visor had detected, a slight distortion in the air about 2 clicks west. "Control, I'm tracking possible cloaked movement at coordinates 34, 72, and 09. Proceed with caution, Lieutenant. Backup is 20 minutes out." Masson unholstered his pulse rifle, the weapon humming to life in his hands. "No time. If it's what I think it is, 20 minutes is 19 too many." He moved with practiced efficiency, each step calculated to minimize sound against the brittle terrain. The distortion grew more pronounced as he approached, a telltale shimmer that marked an enemy stealth drone. They'd been losing scouts to these things for months, silent killers that gathered intel and sometimes eliminated high-value targets before disappearing. Masson positioned himself behind the husk of what might have once been a transport vehicle and calibrated his rifle to anti-stealth frequencies. 1 shot, maybe 2 if he was lucky, before the thing would either attack or self-destruct. The drone hovered, seemingly unaware of his presence. Something about its behavior was off. Most scout drones moved in deliberate patterns, but this one drifted almost aimlessly, occasionally jerking as if malfunctioning. Perfect. Masson exhaled slowly, positioned his finger on the trigger, and froze. The drone had suddenly rotated midair, its primary sensor array swiveling with mechanical precision until its lens was pointed directly at him. Not scanning, not searching. Focused, as if it had known his location all along. For a fraction of a second, Masson felt a chill of recognition pass between himself and the machine. Then he squeezed the trigger, and the rifle discharged a concentrated electromagnetic pulse. The blast hit its mark, and the drone's cloaking field sputtered and died. It fell from the air with surprising heaviness, crashing into the dust without the explosion Masson had braced for. "Control, target neutralized. No detonation." Masson approached cautiously, rifle trained on the fallen object. "This isn't standard configuration. Something's off. Need eyes on this. My gut says we're dealing with something new." He stopped mid-sentence as the drone's outer shell retracted, revealing not the expected tangle of circuitry and weapon systems, but a humanoid form. A woman, her skin a pale blue that seemed to capture and reflect the wasteland's dim light, lay unconscious within what now appeared to be more capsule than drone. She wore a form-fitting combat suit of unfamiliar design, covered in microsensors and adaptive camouflage panels. As he examined the capsule's interior, his blood ran cold. Etched into the control panel was an identification marker in an unfamiliar script, but beneath it in standard military notation, Priority Object K. Madsen. His name specifically designated as a priority. Near the control interface, something else caught his eye. His name again, this time roughly scratched into the metal by hand, not printed by machine. The marks looked deliberate, almost reverent, as if someone had traced the letters repeatedly over time. The capsule's targeting systems flickered to life for a moment, despite the damage, running a facial recognition scan on him. His features were outlined in red on the display, with a message pulsing beneath. Target preserved. Do not eliminate. Before he could process this, the woman's eyes fluttered open, startlingly vivid against her blue skin, and locked directly onto his. There was no confusion in her gaze, no disorientation from the crash, only clear, unmistakable recognition, as if she had been looking for him specifically, as if she knew him intimately. He took an involuntary step back, unsettled by the intensity of her stare. Then her eyes closed again, consciousness slipping away. "Control." Masson's voice remained steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. "It's a person, female, blue-skinned, out cold but breathing. And he hesitated, the implications too strange to process. She has my name marked everywhere, like she's been searching for me, like she knows me. As the extraction team secured the area and prepared the mysterious figure for transport, Madsen couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen her before, perhaps in the peripheral shadows of previous missions. Those moments when luck seemed too convenient, when danger veered inexplicably away. His gaze lingered on her face, serene despite her circumstances, features delicate yet somehow resilient. She didn't look like an enemy, but in Madsen's experience that meant nothing at all. No identification, no match in any allied or known enemy database. The intelligence officer's frustration was evident as she gestured to the screens displaying their captive. Her genetic structure isn't even in our xenobiology records. It's like she doesn't exist. 3 days had passed since Madsen had brought in the blue-skinned woman. She had been placed in medical containment, treated for minor injuries sustained during the crash, but had yet to speak or even acknowledge any attempts at communication. Earlier that morning, Madsen had witnessed something peculiar while passing the medical wing. A young medic had tripped while carrying a tray of supplies, sending vials of medication scattering across the floor. As the medic scrambled to recover the critical medicines, one vial had rolled toward the observation window of the containment room. Through the one-way glass, Madsen watched as the blue woman suddenly tensed, her eyes tracking the endangered vial. When a passing guard nearly crushed it underfoot, her hand had pressed against the glass. Fingers splayed as if reaching to save it, though she couldn't possibly have done so through the barrier. The moment passed unnoticed by everyone except Madsen, who found himself wondering about the instinct to preserve that which was not hers to protect. "What about her equipment?" Madsen asked, leaning forward to study the holographic display of items recovered from the capsule. "That's where it gets interesting." The officer pulled up a detailed scan of what appeared to be a tactical planning device. "This contains comprehensive data on your last operation. Entry points, patrol schedules, defensive measures." She manipulated the display to highlight specific areas, and notations on how to bypass every trap and trigger point your team established. The officer hesitated, then pulled up another file. "We also found this." She activated a small projector removed from the woman's equipment. A holographic image materialized above the table, a three-dimensional rendering of Madsen's face, rotating slowly, accompanied by biometric data and movement patterns. Beneath it, in the same unknown script they'd found in the capsule, was a marker that their translation algorithms had partially decoded. "Primary Guardian, do not eliminate." Madsen stared at his own face hovering in the air between them, a perfect, digital ghost annotated with information so detailed it could only have been gathered through prolonged, intimate observation. "She wasn't just tracking your operations, Lieutenant," the officer said quietly. "She was tracking you, specifically, exclusively." Madsen felt his blood run cold. "She knew our entire operation before we executed it?" "Not just knew it," the officer corrected. "She annotated it. Look at these markings." She zoomed in on a series of symbols overlaid on the operation map. "These indicate alternative routes, timing adjustments. Almost like she was running a parallel mission," Madsen finished, a chill settling in his spine. "Has she spoken to any of the interrogators?" "That's another problem. She doesn't respond to any known language or communication protocols, just watches. Sometimes I swear she's about to say something, then nothing." The officer hesitated, lowering her voice. "Command's losing patience. If she doesn't start talking soon, they'll stop seeing her as a person and start treating her as a thing, an asset to be harvested or disposed of." Madsen stared at the monitors showing the containment room where the woman sat perfectly still on the edge of a medical bed. Her posture relaxed despite the restraints on her wrist. Her eyes tracked the movement of the camera as it adjusted. "She understands everything," he said quietly. "I want to question her myself." "The commander won't authorize." "Look at this." Madsen pointed to the tactical data. "She knows my movements better than I do. This isn't random intelligence gathering. This is focused surveillance. On me." An hour later, after heated debate with his superiors, Madsen entered the containment room alone, against protocol. The woman's eyes fixed on him immediately. A flash of what might have been recognition or relief quickly masked behind an impassive gaze. "Who are you?" he asked simply, taking a seat across from her. She remained silent, but her eyes never left his face, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Why do you have detailed plans of my operations? Why are you tracking me? Still nothing, though he noticed a slight tension in her shoulders at the accusatory tone. I need to know if my team is compromised, if other operations have been affected. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Madsen sighed, then reached for the water container he'd brought with him. He poured a small amount into a cup and slid it across the table toward her. A peace offering, perhaps, or simply human decency. She looked at the water, then back at him, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. Her bound hands reached for the cup with deliberate slowness. As their fingers briefly brushed during the exchange, Madsen felt an inexplicable jolt of familiarity. The woman froze, her gaze suddenly vulnerable, lips parting as if on the verge of speech. For a breathtaking moment, Madsen was certain she would finally communicate. Instead, she closed her eyes and turned away, the cup clutched tightly in her hands untouched. Was it pride that prevented her from accepting even this small kindness? Or something deeper, a reluctance to reveal herself, even in this minor way? Finally, frustrated, Madsen stood. I'm recommending your deactivation. The term was deliberately ambiguous, a cold euphemism that could mean anything from long-term cryostasis to termination. If you won't communicate, you're too great a security risk. As he turned to leave, he caught a flicker of emotion cross her face. Not fear, as he might have expected, but something that looked almost like disappointment. Behind the observation glass, his commanding officer was already shaking his head. She's not going to talk, Lieutenant. We'll move to more aggressive interrogation protocols tomorrow. Madsen nodded curtly, knowing what that meant. Yet something about the situation left him deeply unsettled. Sir, he said after a moment, if she's been monitoring our operations, she might have intelligence on upcoming enemy movements. Your point? My point is that she might be more valuable conscious than not. I request oversight on further interrogation to ensure we don't lose potentially critical information. The commander studied him with narrowed eyes. Granted, but I want a recommendation on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. If she hasn't provided actionable intelligence by then, I'm reclassifying her from unknown asset to hostile entity. The coldness of the terminology struck Madsen. Not person or even prisoner, just entity. As if her humanoid form, her evident intelligence meant nothing against the calculus of military necessity. Understood, sir, he replied, keeping his tone neutral, despite the disquiet churning in his gut. I'll do what I can. Madsen watched through the glass as medical staff entered to check the woman's vitals. She submitted to their procedures without resistance, but her eyes kept drifting to the observation window, as if she knew exactly where he stood despite the one-way glass. What are you, he wondered, and why me? The day after his conversation with the intelligence officer, Madsen found himself drawn back to the containment area. He wasn't scheduled for another interrogation session, but something compelled him to observe the blue-skinned woman from a distance. Through the one-way observation glass, he watched as she sat on the edge of her cot, her movements measured and deliberate. She had been provided with basic amenities, water, food that their xenobiologists thought compatible with her physiology, simple clothing to replace her damaged combat suit. What caught his attention was what she was doing with her hands. The guards had confiscated most of her equipment, but they'd left her a small tool, something like a field maintenance implement for her suit, deeming it too simple to be a weapon. Now she was using it, running it methodically over what appeared to be a component from her combat gear. Not repairing it, not modifying it, just tracing its contours, like a ritual, like a comfort. Madsen recognized the behavior. He'd seen it in veteran soldiers who cleaned their weapons, not out of necessity, but for the familiar repetition, the sense of control it provided. But her equipment wasn't functional, wasn't even complete. She was going through the motions with a fragment, an echo of her purpose. Without fully understanding why, he entered the containment room. The guards tensed but allowed it. His lieutenant's clearance gave him that privilege at least. She didn't look up as he approached, continuing her methodical movements, fingers following the same paths across the metal surface. Only as he stood directly before her did he see what the component was. A thin plate of alloy that would have fit over her chest, a piece of armor designed to protect vital organs. Why do you keep working with that? He asked, his voice softer than intended. It's damaged beyond repair. She paused, her fingers going still on the plate's surface. Slowly, deliberately, she turned away from him, presenting her back. Not answering, not engaging. A clear dismissal. The gesture struck Madsen like a physical blow. Not fear or hostility. Something worse. Disappointment. As if he had failed some test he hadn't known he was taking. He felt an inexplicable wave of shame wash over him. Not for anything he'd done, he treated her humanely, advocated for her continued care rather than deactivation, but for something more fundamental that he couldn't name. A sense that he had missed something vital, had been blind to something important. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said to her unresponsive back. "Maybe then you'll be ready to talk." As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of what she had been tracing on the damaged chest plate, a series of small scratches that, from his angle, looked almost like initials. His initials. But that couldn't be right. The light in the containment room was poor, and his mind was already primed to see connections where perhaps none existed. Still, as the door sealed behind him, the image lingered in his thoughts. Her fingers moving over those scratches with something like reverence, something like grief. The alarm pierced the late-night quiet with brutal efficiency, jolting Madsen from a restless sleep. Red emergency lights bathed his quarters as the base's AI delivered its report with mechanical calm. Alert. Multiple artillery strikes detected. Eastern perimeter breached. All personnel to battle stations. Madsen was on his feet and halfway into his combat gear before the message finished. The timing was impossible. Their intelligence had indicated no enemy movement in this sector for at least a week. Yet the distant thunder of explosions and the trembling floor beneath his feet confirmed the AI's assessment. They were under attack, and by the sounds reverberating through the base's infrastructure, it was no scouting party. He sprinted through corridors already filling with smoke, passing medical staff evacuating patients toward the central bunker. His mind raced to the containment wing where the blue-skinned woman was held. If this attack was related to her capture, the ceiling above him groaned, a massive crack spreading across reinforced concrete like a lightning bolt. Madsen froze, combat instincts momentarily overridden by the primitive human fear of being crushed. The structural supports gave way with a deafening crack, tons of concrete and steel descending toward him in what seemed like agonizing slow motion. He should move. He needed to move, but his body refused to respond, limbs locked in place as death approached from above. Then something slammed into him from the side. Not debris, but a person. Through the chaos and dust, he glimpsed blue skin, felt arms wrap around him with surprising strength as they both tumbled away from the collapsing section. They hit the floor hard, rolling, the woman's body somehow positioned to take the brunt of the impact. When the dust settled, Madsen found himself alive, partially sheltered in an alcove formed by fallen beams. The woman lay beside him, her breathing labored, a jagged piece of rebar protruding from her side. Dark azure blood seeped between her fingers as she pressed a hand against the wound. Madsen stared in disbelief. She had been in restraints, under guard in the containment wing, yet somehow she'd escaped during the attack, found him amid the chaos, and thrown herself between him and certain death. Why? The question escaped him in a hoarse whisper. Her eyes found his, clouded with pain but still intensely focused. She opened her mouth as if to finally speak, but only a soft gasp emerged, blue-tinged blood appearing at the corner of her lips. "Medic!" Madsen shouted into the smoky corridor, supporting her weight as gently as he could. "I need a medic here now." Her hand grasped his wrist with surprising strength, forcing his attention back to her face. She shook her head slightly, a silent message that cut through Madsen's confusion like a blade. "There's no time." More explosions rocked the base. Closer now. With grim determination, Madsen lifted her as carefully as possible, ignoring her silent protests, and began making his way toward the medical bay. Each step jostled her wound, drawing pained gasps that she tried to suppress. "Stay with me," he urged, uncertain why the fate of this unknown entity suddenly mattered so much. "Just stay with me." By the time they reached a medical station, her skin had paled to an ashen blue, her eyes struggling to remain focused. The medic took one look at the wound and started barking orders, but Madsen could read the prognosis in the man's tense movements. The injury was catastrophic. They could make her comfortable, but little else. As emergency protocols blared around them and personnel rushed to defend what remained of the base, Madsen found himself unwilling to leave her side. The mystery that had consumed him for days now seemed secondary to the simple fact of her sacrifice. She had saved him. An enemy, or so he'd believed, had risked everything to preserve his life. Nothing made sense anymore. In the days that followed, while the base recovered from the attack and casualty reports filled command channels, Madsen became obsessed with a new mission. Something the Blue Woman had done, saving him despite being treated as a hostile, had cracked open a door in his understanding of the conflict, and he couldn't leave it unopened. He began reviewing archival footage of his previous missions, focusing not on primary objectives or documented engagements, but on the periphery, the shadows, the inexplicable moments of fortune. A memory surfaced, a night operation 2 years ago, caught in a violent sandstorm that had separated him from his unit. Disoriented, oxygen running low, he had glimpsed a figure through the swirling wall of dust, a silhouette that seemed to beckon him to follow. He dismissed it as oxygen deprivation, a hallucination born of desperation. Yet somehow he'd found his way to a pocket of shelter, surviving until the storm passed and rescue arrived. The official report attributed his survival to exceptional situational awareness and training. Now he wondered. Another incident gnawed at him, a high-risk extraction that had gone catastrophically wrong. Pinned down with no extraction point, his team expecting certain death as enemy forces converged from 3 directions. Then, inexplicably, the largest enemy contingent had suddenly withdrawn, creating a narrow escape corridor. Military intelligence had never satisfactorily explained the enemy's illogical retreat. At the time, he'd accepted it as enemy communication failure, or perhaps faulty intelligence on their part. In the command center's analysis room, surrounded by holographic displays of mission data, Madsen replayed infrared scans from a raid 6 months earlier. There, in the corner of the frame, a heat signature too regular to be ambient, too controlled to be random. An older archivist named Farron approached, his eyes narrowing at the footage Madsen was examining. He'd been cataloging mission data for 20 years, had seen patterns no one else bothered to notice. "Interesting choice of mission to review," Farron remarked, studying the infrared anomaly Madsen had isolated. "Not many would look at the periphery like that." "Just being thorough," Madsen replied, trying to sound casual. Farron made a non-committal sound, then said, "You know what's always puzzled me about your record, Lieutenant?" "What's that?" "You've survived 17 high-risk operations without a single critical injury." The archivist's eyes remained fixed on the screen. "Statistically improbable. I've seen careers like yours before. Decorated soldiers with impossible luck." He paused. "But have you ever asked yourself why? Why you and not the others?" The question lingered between them, uncomfortable in its implication. Madsen felt a memory surface. A raid on an ammunition depot 2 years ago. A proximity mine had failed to detonate when he stepped directly on its pressure plate. Equipment malfunction, the report had concluded. Just dumb luck. He'd never questioned it. Until now. "There was an operation in Sector 7, Madsen said slowly. "A proximity mine failed when I triggered it. Could have been faulty wiring, environmental factors, or deliberate interference," Farron finished, "like someone manipulating the detonator remotely." Madsen stared at the archivist. "What are you suggesting?" Farron gestured to the heat signature on the screen. "That maybe luck had nothing to do with it. That maybe someone's been playing a very long game. In your favor." He turned to leave, then added, "Question is, Lieutenant, why you? What makes you special enough for that kind of investment?" He enhanced the image, isolated the pattern, and ran it through recognition filters. A silhouette emerged, humanoid, moving in concert with his own recorded movements but always at a distance. Always in positions that provided optimal coverage of his blind spots. Madsen pulled up another mission, then another. The same pattern repeated. A guardian shadow anticipating threats, neutralizing dangers before they manifested. In one recording, he watched in astonishment as a mine he had no memory of avoiding deactivated seconds before his past self would have triggered it. The shadow, her visible for just a moment as she interfered with the device, then vanished back into the darkness. Then he found it, footage from Operation Redline, his closest brush with death 2 years earlier. The mission had been a disaster from the start, bad intelligence leading his squad directly into heavy enemy resistance. The official record noted that Madsen had survived a sniper ambush due to superior tactical awareness and battlefield instinct. He played the enhanced footage, watching his past self move through the ruins of an abandoned research facility. What the official report didn't show, what no one had noticed at the time, was the flicker of movement at the edge of the frame. As his past self stepped into what should have been a fatal field of fire, a blur of motion erupted from a shadowed alcove. The recording's quality was poor, distorted by electromagnetic interference, but he could make out a figure lunging from concealment, tackling an enemy combatant positioned on a high vantage point. The camera briefly lost tracking, then refocused just in time to capture the enemy sniper falling from his position, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the air, rather than into Madsen's unprotected back. The figure who had caused the fall was gone, vanished back into the shadows before the recording could capture more than a silhouette. At the time, the intelligence division had attributed the anomaly to a recording glitch or debris moved by the wind. Madsen had accepted that explanation without question. Now, reviewing the footage frame by frame, he could see the deliberate movement, the calculated intervention. More than that, he recognized the fluid efficiency of the motion, the same economy of movement he had observed in the containment cell. Her movement, her intervention, a life saved. His life. One of many, if the pattern held across all the missions he was now reviewing. As he dove deeper into the archives, an alert flashed on his terminal. The base's intelligence division had managed to partially decrypt some of the data from the woman's equipment. He opened the file, discovering a trove of information that both clarified and deepened the mystery. The decryption team had focused on a recurring symbol found throughout her gear, what appeared to be an identification code or designation. The translation was incomplete, but certain words appeared with high confidence ratings. Designation Guardian. Primary objective, K. Madsen. Protocol, preserve at all costs. Directive, protect until final breath. Below this was a longer text, mostly untranslated, but with fragments that painted a disturbing picture. Genetic lineage carries, untranslatable. Only surviving descendant of the untranslatable must be preserved for future untranslatable. And finally, a passage that seemed to be some kind of oath or covenant. I am the shadow that falls between danger and the chosen. I am the hand that diverts death's arrow. I am unseen, unknown, and unacknowledged. This is my honor. This is my purpose, until my final breath sustains his life. Madsen stared at the screen, a chill running through him. Not a soldier, not a spy. A guardian specifically assigned to him. But why? What made him special enough to warrant such dedicated protection? He downloaded the data to a secure personal device, knowing instinctively that this information needed to be kept from command, at least temporarily. Whatever was happening went beyond standard military conflict. Something deeper was at play, something that made him not just a lieutenant in the coalition forces, but a chosen with significance he couldn't yet grasp. Lieutenant? Madsen barely registered the voice of the junior analyst who had entered the room. Lieutenant Madsen, sir. Command is asking for your report on the Eastern Perimeter reconstruction. Tell them it's coming, Madsen replied distractedly, eyes never leaving the display where he was now overlaying mission maps, tracing the shadow's movements across dozens of operations. A pattern emerged, not random, not coincidental, but deliberate and protective. She had been there, all along, watching, guarding, saving his life in ways he'd never known. When the analyst left, Madsen collapsed into a chair, the weight of revelation pressing down on him, the soldier without scars. Now he understood. He hadn't been lucky or skilled enough to avoid injury all these years. He'd been protected. But why? Who was she to him, or what was he to her? With newfound urgency, Madsen made his way to the medical bay, where the blue woman lay in critical condition. The attack had devastated the base's resources, but someone, perhaps recognizing her role in saving Madsen, had ensured she received care rather than being terminated as an enemy combatant. She was barely conscious when he entered, monitoring equipment, registering the slow decline of her vital functions. The medics had done what they could, but her physiology was too different, the damage too severe. Madsen approached her bedside, a strange emotion tightening his throat. Not grief. How could he grieve for someone whose existence he'd only just discovered? But something more complex. The disorienting sense of losing something he never knew he had. Her eyes fluttered open at his approach, recognition bringing a faint spark to their depths. "Why?" Masson asked, the single word containing all his confusion, all his need to understand before it was too late. Her lips curved in the ghost of a smile, and with evident effort, she raised a trembling hand toward his. He took it without hesitation, surprised by how right it felt to offer this small comfort to a being he'd considered an enemy mere days ago. "I've been studying the archives," he continued, voice low and urgent. "You've been there, haven't you? All those missions, all those close calls I thought I'd navigated through skill or luck. It was you, always you." As he spoke, a memory blazed through his mind with sudden, searing clarity. 6 months ago, a raid on an abandoned laboratory. He'd been leading point when movement caught his eye, a figure slipping between shadows. Against protocol, he'd pursued alone, tracking the intruder to a dead-end corridor. When he'd finally cornered the figure and trained his weapon on them, something had made him hesitate. A flash of blue skin in the dim light, eyes that had met his directly, without fear. In that moment, lowering his weapon had felt inexplicably right. He'd radioed back. "False alarm, just equipment shifting." He'd never reported the encounter, never understood why he'd let her go. Now, looking at those same eyes, recognition crystallized. It had been her, and she remembered too. He could see it in her gaze. She swallowed with difficulty, the monitoring equipment registering a spike in her failing systems as she gathered strength to speak. When the words finally came, they were soft, accented in a way he couldn't place, but perfect in their clarity. "I've spent my whole life protecting you, while you hunted me." The simple statement hit Masson with physical force, stealing his breath. In those few words lay implications too vast, too profound to process immediately. A lifetime. His life specifically. Hunted, not by him personally, but by his people, his military, his side of a conflict he'd never questioned. The sandstorm, the inexplicable enemy retreat, the deactivated mines. Countless moments of inexplicable luck throughout his career. Moments when death had seemed certain until it wasn't. Not luck at all. Her, always her. Moving in the shadows of his life, a guardian he never knew he had, steering away danger while remaining unseen. And in return, his military, his people, had marked her kind as enemies to be eliminated. Had he himself given the order to fire on others like her, never knowing they were not the aggressors he believed them to be? The possibility crashed through his consciousness like a physical blow, restructuring everything he thought he knew about the conflict, about his role in it, about the very nature of the enemy. Questions crowded his mind. Who was she really? Why had she dedicated herself to his protection? What did she know that he didn't? But as he opened his mouth to ask, he realized her eyes had drifted closed again, her breathing becoming more labored. The moment for answers was slipping away, leaving only the certainty that he had been fundamentally wrong about something essential. About her, about the conflict, perhaps about everything. Her fingers weakly squeezed his, drawing his attention back to her face. Despite her pain, despite knowing she was dying far from home among those who had called her enemy, her expression held no bitterness. Only a strange peace, as if completing a long and difficult journey. Masson stayed with her through the night, watching as her life ebbed away in the sterile confines of a military medical bay. She never spoke again, never offered the explanations he craved. When the end came in the quiet hours before dawn, it was with the same grace that had marked her protection of him, silent, dignified, and without demand for recognition. She died without a name, without rank, without asking anything of him. But in her passing, she left him with something he couldn't ignore. The understanding that the truth of their conflict was far more complex than he had ever been told. Sitting alone in his quarters that night, Masson stared at the holographic projector he'd taken from the medical bay. Against protocol, against orders, a small act of rebellion that felt monumental after years of unquestioning obedience. He activated it, and her face appeared above the device. A detailed scan taken during her containment. Blue skin, features both alien and yet hauntingly familiar. He found himself reaching toward the projection before catching himself, his hand passing through empty light. The memory of their first true encounter in that laboratory corridor mingled with others. The hesitation that had saved his life, the shadow in the sandstorm, the voice in his damaged helmet. Connections forming, revealing a pattern he'd been blind to. 3 years ago, Operation Blackfront, a simple retrieval mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. The bunker walls trembled under heavy bombardment, concrete dust raining from the ceiling. What should have been an empty outpost had turned into a death trap. The enemy had known they were coming. Somehow, they'd known. "Bravo team, status," Madsen whispered into his comm unit, his back pressed against a fallen support beam as pulse fire riddled the space around him. No response, only static. He was alone, cut off. The intel had been wrong, or worse, compromised. 3 squads, gone in less than 10 minutes. And now the enemy was hunting the survivors. His helmet display flickered with damage, oxygen reserves dropping as the ventilation system took multiple hits. 16 minutes of breathable air remained. Extraction was 30 minutes out, if they were coming at all. Then he heard it, a voice in his helmet comm. Soft, barely there beneath the static. "Left corridor, 3rd junction, now." He'd assumed it was squad communication breaking through the interference. Maybe a survivor. He hesitated only briefly before following the instruction, slipping into the left corridor just as a thermal charge detonated in his previous position. The voice came again, more urgent. "Down, crawl space, floor plate." At the 3rd junction, he found it, a maintenance access in the floor, partially hidden by debris. He slipped inside just as enemy combatants swept the corridor above. Throughout the extraction, the voice guided him, warning of patrols, suggesting alternate routes, once even directing him to remain still for 7 excruciating minutes as enemy soldiers searched mere meters from his position. When he finally reached the extraction point, a location entirely different from the planned rendezvous, the voice had whispered one final instruction: "Signal now." He'd sent the emergency beacon, and within minutes, a friendly extraction craft had appeared seemingly from nowhere. Later, technicians had found no record of the communications. His helmet systems showed only standard channels, all offline during the critical period. They'd attributed his survival to luck, instinct, and training. The voice was dismissed as oxygen deprivation, stress-induced hallucination. Madsen had eventually accepted their explanation. What else could it have been? Now staring at the holographic face hovering before him, Madsen understood. It had been her, somehow present yet unseen, guiding him to safety while remaining in the shadows. He accessed the command terminal in his quarters, using his lieutenant's credentials to pull archived mission data from Operation Blackfront. The footage was fragmented, corrupted by electromagnetic interference from the battle. But with his new perspective, he knew what to look for. There, at the edge of infrared scanning frames, a heat signature moving parallel to his own, always keeping obstacles between herself and the recording devices. In one damaged frame, partially reconstructed, he caught a glimpse of blue skin as she disabled an enemy automated sentry, moments before it would have detected him. He switched to audio filtering, isolating frequencies outside standard communication bands. After running enhanced pattern recognition, he found it, a voice, speaking in a language he didn't understand, but with cadences that matched the remembered whispers in his helmet. They'd been right about one thing. His comm system had been offline, but hers hadn't been. She'd tapped directly into his helmet's audio systems, bypassing the damaged comm unit entirely. As the pieces fell into place, Madsen felt a strange mixture of awe and disquiet. How many other missions? How many other close calls had been her intervention? And the most troubling question of all, why him? What made Lieutenant Cale Madsen, unremarkable scout officer of the coalition forces, worthy of such dedicated protection? The woman sat perfectly still in her containment chamber, eyes focused on a point beyond the visible. To the guards and observers, she appeared docile, unresponsive. They had no way of knowing the calculations running through her mind, the sensory data her enhanced physiology gathered even through the dampening fields of her prison. She could hear Madsen's footsteps approaching long before the door opened, the particular cadence of his gait as familiar to her as her own heartbeat after years of shadowing him. 19 steps from the elevator. A pause at the security checkpoint. 12 more steps to the containment room door. The panel slid open, and he entered. Alone this time, against protocol. Interesting. A risk taken. The subtle change in his behavior pattern suggested growing doubt in his mission parameters. Good. Necessary even for what would come. She kept her expression neutral as he sat across from her, though her senses cataloged everything about him. Slight elevation in heart rate, pupil dilation, a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been present in their previous encounters. He was beginning to question, beginning to see. I couldn't speak to you, she thought, watching him arrange his data tablet on the table between them. But I saw everything. How you gave water to enemy prisoners when you thought no one was watching. How you refused to execute the wounded. How you would laugh to yourself when alone on watch, at some private joke only you knew. I saw you weep over a fallen comrade's letter to his child. I knew you weren't the monster my people claimed. Just a soldier who hadn't been given enough time to see through the lies. Just a man caught in machinery too large to comprehend. Not yet time to speak. Not with the surveillance systems monitoring every sound, every micro-expression. Her people's intelligence had been clear. Direct communication would trigger immediate termination protocols. Her value as an intelligence source was the only reason she remained alive, and that tenuous protection would vanish the moment she revealed her true purpose. Instead, she allowed herself the smallest shift in posture, a deliberate easing of her shoulders, a minuscule softening around her eyes. Subtle signals that he wouldn't consciously register, but that his subconscious would interpret as non-threatening. As he spoke, asking the same questions as before, she wondered if he remembered the sandstorm on his third deployment, if he recalled the voice in his damaged helmet during Operation Blackfront, if he had ever noticed the enemy platoon that had nearly discovered his position during the Karakov extraction, mysteriously redirected moments before disaster, 3 years of shadowing, of calculating trajectory adjustments to enemy fire, of discreetly manipulating environmental factors to ensure his survival, all while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection by either side. The defense systems she'd sabotaged, the intel she'd carefully leaked to counter enemy ambushes, the countless times she'd positioned herself to take a lethal shot meant for him, only to have circumstance render her intervention unnecessary. And now captured. A miscalculation. The drone's cloaking system had malfunctioned at the worst possible moment, but perhaps this was the path. Her trainers had always emphasized adaptation over rigid planning. If direct protection was no longer possible, perhaps understanding was the next best option. She focused on Madsen's face, memorizing every line, every shadow. The human she had been assigned to protect since her earliest training. The human whose genetic profile was encoded into her own modified DNA, creating a biological imperative to ensure his survival. He would never know the truth of why he had been chosen, of what he carried within him, unknowing, of the hope he represented to her people. But perhaps he could understand enough to survive what was coming, what had always been coming, since before either of them had drawn breath. She watched him rise to leave, frustration evident in his movements. Soon the base would be attacked. Soon choices would be made. And then perhaps words would finally be possible. The wasteland stretched before Madsen, familiar yet strange now that he saw it through altered eyes. He had left the base without authorization, carrying only minimal supplies and the weight of recent revelations. His military identification, access codes, and tactical gear he had ceremonially burned in a shallow crater 2 kilometers back, letting the acrid smoke dissipate into the perpetually hazy sky. His uniform followed, the fabric that had defined him for so long reduced to ash. In its place, he wore nondescript civilian clothing salvaged from abandoned settlements, the kind of outfit that belonged to no faction, claimed no allegiance. The journey took him deep into the wasteland, to the ruins of an old relay station where his first major mission as a lieutenant had taken place. Years ago, he had led a team to destroy what command had called an enemy communications hub. Now reviewing the memory with fresh perspective, he wondered what messages they had really silenced that day. On the twisted metal frame that had once supported the relay's main antenna, Madsen carefully affixed a small device he had constructed from spare parts. Not a weapon or a signal jammer, but a beacon, one that would broadcast on frequencies his military didn't monitor, but that might be meaningful to others, to her people, wherever they were. From his pack, he withdrew the most precious item he had salvaged from the base, a small metallic plate recovered from her combat suit. It had been damaged during the rebar injury that ultimately took her life. The plate was covered with intricate circuitry unlike anything in human technology. But what had stopped his heart was the discovery that his name was etched into its surface in her language. A character set he couldn't read, but which intelligence had. Partially decoded, she had carried his name over her heart like a talisman, a marker of her sacred duty to protect. Even more significant was the deep gouge that marred the plate's surface, a scar in the metal that, upon closer examination, formed an unmistakable pattern. His initials, KM. Not printed by machine or etched with precision tools, but carved, manually with patience and care, a personal marking on an otherwise technological artifact, something intimate amid the functional. He secured the plate to the beacon, connecting it to the transmission system. The device hummed to life, emitting a soft pulsing glow. It would broadcast two messages on alternating frequencies, one in standard human language, the other translated into what little they knew of her people's communication patterns. The same message bridging the divide between their worlds. Not all targets are enemies. Not all guardians carry flags. Beneath the beacon, he secured a simple plaque fashioned from a sheet of scavenged alloy. Upon it, he had painstakingly etched words that felt inadequate but necessary. Ghost. Savior. Forgotten. Next to the plaque, Madsen placed a small, battered notebook, his field journal, where he had once maintained meticulous records of enemy combatants encountered, targets neutralized. On the final page, he had written her designation as it had appeared in military records, unknown hostile entity Yashare 702. But now he had crossed out the designation with a single line, leaving it visible but nullified. Beneath it, he had written, Guardian, Protector, Sacrifice. The beacon activated with a soft electronic tone, joining its signal to the ambient electromagnetic noise of the wasteland. Madsen stepped back, feeling a weight lift from him even as a new one settled across his shoulders. The duty of truth, the burden of witness. She was never a target, he said to the empty wasteland, the words carrying no further than his own ears. She was my shadow, my shield, my greatest mistake. He touched the chest plate with reverent fingers. Now I protect you, he whispered to the empty air, to her memory, in my own way. As the beacon activated, its soft pulse joining the ambient electromagnetic noise of the wasteland, Madsen stepped back. He had no illusions about what awaited him. Desertion was among the highest crimes in military law, and the wasteland itself was unforgiving to those without faction protection. But for the first time since he could remember, the path before him felt right. Whatever she had protected in him, whatever she had seen worth saving, he would honor it by seeking truth rather than blindly following orders. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the conflict zones and military installations, there had to be answers. About her, about why she had dedicated her life to his protection, about who they really were to each other in a war that suddenly seemed built on lies. Madsen turned his back on the beacon and began walking, a solitary figure against the vast wasteland. Behind him, the small light pulsed steadily, a memorial to an unnamed guardian and a promise to question everything he had once taken as truth. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and perhaps, if he was fortunate, understanding. He walked toward it without hesitation, finally worthy of the protection she had given him all along.